Hi, and welcome to Dance Ninja's teacher training. And today we're going to talk about pricing, and specifically what should you be charging for private lessons, group classes, workshops like 1 or 2 day workshops, or big events, right? And how do you know if you're charging too much or too little, or if you're charging the perfect amount? Right? And we'll also cover some of the common mistakes that even really talented dancers make when they're choosing their pricing. And of course, right now you can see you're getting this template on how to fill out your numbers so that you can get some quick numbers and know if you've got numbers that make sense for you. Let's start with just talking about how do you know if you're charging too much? And it's actually really simple. It's just, if you can't hit your time or like how often you want to be hired, your goals for how often you want to be hired, either on a minimum, an ideal, or a maximum, then you're probably charging too much, right? At least for that moment in time. Your rates might change as you get better at your dancing, your teaching, and your ability to offer things to people in a way that excites them, right? Some people call it sales. I like it to call it just offering people stuff, because to me it's just about making sure they know what you provide, not trying to hard sell them on it. So really it's as simple as that. You're charging too much if you can't hit your goals, right? And you're charging too little. You're charging too much if you can't hit your time goals. And we'll go over that in a second. Right? And you're charging too little, I think, if you can't hit your monetary goals. Okay? So that's kind of how you can look at this. As we go through, you'll see some examples. So let's start. Actually, before we get into this, let's go over one of the biggest mistakes I see people make when they're choosing their pricing. Right? And even talented dancers do this. Everybody does this, and it's just because it's the norm, I think, that it happens. But I don't want you to be the norm. I want you to be really thinking about and planning out things so that you can be successful. And also, one of the reasons I think why many instructors aren't successful or they struggle is because they're just randomly choosing numbers, right? If you think about it, most instructors, they look at what other people are charging, and then they charge based off of that. This person charges $100 an hour. I'm not as good as them, but I'm pretty good, so I'll charge $60 or $80 or something like that, right? Or this person charges $40 an hour, and I'm like them, so I'm going to charge $40 an hour. But here's the reason why that's not a smart method. Here's several reasons, right? One, you don't know their goals, right? You don't know what the person that's charging has goals. They might have very low time goals or very high monetary goals or low monetary goals, right? So you can't just base your numbers off of that because you don't know their goals. You don't know how many lessons they're going to be teaching each week, right? You don't know if they're sold out or not, right? And you don't know why they chose their prices, right? So it's kind of, if you choose based off someone else, you might as well just be blindly guessing, right? And now it can work, but it's not going to give you very much confidence in yourself if you're just blindly guessing. I have more confidence in my pricing, and I can say, no, I can't go that low to people because I ran my numbers, right? I know what my minimums are. I know what my maximums are and all that kind of stuff. The other thing I want to point out is that when the instructor that you're copying, most likely they didn't even know the answers to the questions I'm talking about. They didn't have goals. They didn't know how many lessons they were going to be teaching per week and all that stuff. So they were just guessing off of someone else, right? So it's really important you're not just guessing. Does that make sense? Okay, so instead of guessing, what do? We build out our goals, right? We think about, okay, well, how much time do I want to be putting into, my lessons per week, or private lessons, group classes, workshops, things like that, right? And let's just say we're focusing on private lessons for right now, okay? And let's say, all right, every week I want to teach at least 5 private lessons, right? 5 hours, let's say, 5, or it doesn't matter whether you do it per hour. right now it's in a per hour basis, but I want to teach 5 hours of private lessons, right? Like minimum. If I'm doing less than that, I'm unhappy. And the way to think about your minimum is kind of like what fills your soul, right? So some people don't even like private lessons, so they might put 0 here because they'd rather focus on other areas. But you might be like, I really love that one-on-one connection that I get with people, so at a minimum, I want to be doing at least 1 a day, Monday through Friday, so 5 per week, right? Let's put per week, right? And then my ideal, let's say I want to do ideally 10 per week. And then my max, maybe I definitely don't want to be going over 20 hours per week, right? And now, here's an interesting thing that I like to add in. I like to go, well, how many hours do you want to be learning per week? Right? Like improving your dancing, improving your teaching, improving your business behind it all, and that kind of stuff, right? And so I want to make sure that I have room for this. Some people put, I'll teach 40 hours a week, right? And then, well, how much time do you want to spend learning? Well, I want to spend the same amount of time learning as I spend teaching or something. Like they want to spend 40 hours. Now they're working 80-hour weeks. That's insane, right? So it can be done, but you're going to burn yourself out most likely if you do that, right? So for me, I'm looking at, okay, how much do I want to learn? Let's say I want to learn at least a minimum of, let's say 5 hours per week. Let's say that. Now, that's not so bad. So then my real max is going to, if you look at it, my max, I've got to take that into play. Am I willing to work 45 hours per week, basically? Because this is still work, right? Am I willing to put that much time into my dancing? If so, great. Keep that as your numbers. If you're like, you know what? No, I really want 40 to be my max, then you got to bring this down to 35, right? Or if that were 20, you'd need to bring it down to 20. Does that make sense? Right? So I'm actually going to keep it lower. I'm going to keep it down to 20 per week for right now. And let's look at some other things. So the other thing to think about is it's really when you're looking at learning, you've got to add the number that you want to be spent learning with the max and make sure that's under, right? With this one, you see there's 3 pluses. You're actually going to add learning to all of these, and we'll see why in just a second. So now I want to think about, okay, what are my monetary goals, right? My monetary goals, let's say it's $40,000 a year. Let's say 40K. I don't need to write the dollar sign out. Why there's 3 dollar signs out. Anyway, is my minimum, right? And my ideal, let's say, is, let's go with 80K. And my max is now, and when you get into maxes and stuff, I like to, well, let's talk about minimums first. Why do you pick minimum? You got to think, what is the amount that I can survive off of, and pay my bills and not worry about things, right? So this number is thinking about paying everything. And you might want to include your expenses for your private lessons, group classes, and things like that. For right now, I'll show you how to do it. If you're not including expenses, we'll just take that into consideration a little later. But just know that either this number is going to either include expenses or not for everything involving your business, right? But right now, let's say you want to make 40K. You want to bring it home so that you can spend that on your food, your rent, your family, not paying to, the space for the private lessons or things like that. This is just for bringing home your own stuff. Then we have 80K, and then let's say 200K. Yeah, is your dream number. And now, how much do you want to spend on learning? That's the other thing that you want to think about, right? And actually, just to keep numbers easier, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, I want to spend 20K on learning. Oh, yeah, so now when I'm thinking about this, now I got to go, oh, okay, so now I know I need to make 60K, or I need to make 100K, or 220K to hit my goals. Does that make sense? Right? And now you might choose, no, I want to spend 10K on learning. Remember, this is like traveling to dance events that you want to learn about. This is like taking programs like Dance Ninjas, teacher trainings, all sorts of different things. So I recommend when you first start out, this number should be high. And it might go low as you get better if you don't want to keep hitting your dreams. But I think this goes up as you go up. I would kind of keep it similar to your minimum and really reinvest a lot of your money back into things. Does that make sense? So now I'm going to adjust some numbers here just so that I can make things easy. And you don't necessarily need to adjust it in this way, but I'm going to do it so that 60K is my ideal, plus that means the total is going to be 80K. And I'm going to do this one to be, okay, realistically I'm going to make 20K, and 20K of it is going to go also towards other things. So 40K is my goal, or 80K. Does that make sense? Yeah? Now, I probably didn't need to erase that. I probably should just leave it, just so when you think of this number, you don't need to add in anymore. It's already involved in here. Okay? Now, to price your private lessons, you got to think about, okay, what are my goals? Let's say my goal is 40K. Right? $40,000. And now I think, all right, the next thing I got to think is how many weeks per year am I willing to work? Right? Let's say that I'm willing to work 40 weeks a year. Right? Now, this is just a number. You can fill in your own numbers. You'll have to do the math on it, right? And I do recommend, I'm actually picking numbers that are easy so that you can see how it makes sense. But I'm also not picking numbers that I necessarily recommend for you. One, because everybody should have different numbers, right? And I want you to get really specific on your numbers. So these are just examples. They happen to be somewhat accurate numbers that people might choose. If you think about 40 weeks, that means you get 12 weeks off or 3 months off during the year. So if you think of it like a school teacher, right? They teach for most of the year and then they get their summer off. Maybe that's 3 months or something like that. Maybe it's only 2 months. You can decide. Again, filling in those numbers. Now, you want to think, okay, if I'm working 40 weeks per year, how many hours per week am I going to work, right? And the important thing when you're trying to find out your minimum, we're going to actually, right now, we're trying to find out our minimum, then the important thing is to think about the maximum we're willing to work, right? So 20 hours is my maximum and 40 weeks, right? So if you divide, you take the 40,000, you divide it by 40, brings it down to 1,000, then you divide it by 20, right, which brings it down to $50 per hour, right? And I know this says times. I don't know like how good you guys are at math, but I just did it so it's easy so you can see like the years. You can cancel those out, and the weeks you can cancel those out, and then you get dollar per hour, right? But really it's 40K divided by, right, because it's over the 40, and divided by the 20, right? So there's a ton of different ways you could set this up. I just wanted it to be nice and pretty so you could see things that make sense, right? So remember, the key is when you're trying to find out your minimum, you've got to take in your max hours per week into consideration and the most amount of weeks per year you are. And the reason why that is because if I charge less than $50 an hour, then I cannot hit my minimum monetary goal, right? Unless I work more than I'm willing to work, right? I can no longer work. Does that make sense? Right? So if I charge $45 an hour, then I'm not going to hit this 40K unless I work more hours or more weeks, right? And if that's really my maximum, I need to choose a price that gets me to that, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that you run out and go immediately into charging $50 an hour if you're a brand new instructor. We are in a few minutes, or maybe halfway through this call, we're going to talk about a structure for how to go from like, okay, I've never taught before, to getting to your ideal price or even higher, getting to your dream price or something like that, so that you can hit 80K or something, right? Because if you think, if you want to hit your ideal 80K and you still don't want to work more than that, right? That's your maximum hours, then you need to be charging $100 per hour, right? And there's a lot of instructors that are charging that. That's totally normal, as long as you're a solid instructor. So you could be doing that to get your 80K. Now, there's one other thing that you want to take into consideration, and that's your expense, right? Now, if you already included it here, your business expenses, then you don't need to do this. But if you want to take home this amount, or take home 80K, right, then you need to add any business expense on top, which usually is just rent, right? And usually per hour, you're looking at $5 to $20 per hour. So you might end up charging $105 or $120 per hour in order to cover your bases to be able to do this. Does that make sense? And again, this is just understanding what your goals are to be able to hit these numbers, not necessarily what you should immediately start at right now. We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to cross over. Obviously, if you wanted to hit 200K, you would need to charge more. I'm not going to go over that because there's a different strategy that we use to find out how much we can charge. It's a different strategy, and I'll walk you through that in a little bit. But just know this is your minimum if you're trying to make that. $50 is your minimum if you're trying to make 40K per year. And these are your numbers, right? But again, you can change these numbers up a little. Now, let's go into group classes, okay? Same thing. You want to make 40K per year, right? And you're willing to work, same thing. Let's say you're willing to work 40 weeks per year, right? And now, how many classes are you willing to do per week, right? And in this case, instead of willing to do, right, willing to do 20, I'm going to think about what's likely to happen, right? And I think it's important to do willing as well, but you can see the numbers would come out the same. And with all of these, I think it's important to do what you're willing to do, what the maximum is, but also a realistic, like, what do I think I can do, right? Meaning, like, there's only so many people in the world, and so there might not be enough room to do 20 classes a week. Most likely, anywhere you're going, there is enough room to do 20 classes a week, but you're going to have a long time getting to that point if you don't have a really good process for doing that. So let's say you do 10 classes per week, right? Now you need to make 40,000 divided by 40 is 1,000, divided by 10 is $100 per class, right? So that's, again, it's just an example just to figure out, oh, how am I running my numbers? But it is important to know, okay, I need to make $100 per class if this is the amount of numbers I'm going to be doing per week, right? Now, another thing I will say about this is you can combine these, right? And when it comes to group classes, it might be more important to start combining things because, again, our numbers might be lower there, right? So you might decide, well, right now, I'm only going to be able to teach, maybe I'm only teaching 5 classes, and rather than going to $200, I'll keep it at $100, and I'll make some of my money off of private lessons, right? So when I'm going through these, I want you to think about it as far as like, what if you were only to do these, right? But also realistically, how many you're going to do so that you can hit your numbers, right? And if I were to say the difference between the two, when you're looking at how many am I willing to do, what's my maximum, that just gives you an idea of like, if that's all I did and it were possible, can my price hit my goal, right? That's the reason why we do that. So if I go, okay, I'm willing to do, 20 classes per week, then, I can charge as little as $50, and I know it's going to work out. I know I'm going to hit my goals, right? The reason, the thing that some people accidentally do is they only charge $30, right? And there's literally no way, even if they work their butts off, that they could actually get their goal, right? And that's assuming these really are their maximums, right? So you got to know what is the most that I'm willing to do, the maximum, and then what price can I charge to, that's the price that I can charge to hit my goal. Okay. But then that's how you find your minimum. Then you look at your realistic as well, and realistic you end up combining things together to do it. And the realistic again was, okay, I'm only going to do 5 classes, right? And so, and realistically I'm going to charge $100 per class, which means I'm only going to make $20K from this, right? So I'm going to need to make it up somewhere else. So that's kind of how we do realistic. It's almost like you're going to work backwards. You're going to go, okay, that's a number that makes sense to me. That's how much I'm probably going to teach per week and per year, and then that's how I'm going to make my money. And then, of course, we need to build out a plan to be able to get these classes as well and to be teaching that. But it's good to have numbers like these just in your mind, right? So that you can, I don't need to erase that. So that you can justify your pricing when you go to people. All right, let's move on to workshops and big events. So now, with workshops and big events, I think of them slightly differently, although the numbers can be the same. Right, so let's start with a 2-day event. Let's say you want to make 40,000, right? This is going to be really easy. You're willing to work 40 workshops per year, right? So then each workshop needs to be $1,000. Really simple, right? Now, here's a couple of tips on this though. Let's say that's for a 2-day, right? You literally only have the ability to do 52 weekends a year, so if you're doing weekend workshops, you couldn't go above 52, right? If they're 1 day, you could go up to, 2 different places in a week, right? But I wouldn't just say, okay, well, it's 500 for 1 day and 1,000 for 2 day, because there's other costs that are involved in doing a 1 day besides a 2 day, like just planning and traveling to the place and all the other setups. You want to, if you're doing a 1 day workshop, it probably shouldn't be 500. It probably should be 600, 700, 800, something like that. And then you give a deal for people that do a full 2-day workshop, right? So this is a really good example, but here's another thing I want you guys to think about. When you get into big events, there's another mistake I think that people make all the time, and that's they set their goals, they ran their numbers, they're like, okay, I can't charge less than $1,000, right? So they go to these big events and they say, my minimum's $1,000, and again, this is a random number. Your minimum might be 500, it might be 10,000. Well, I don't know what your minimums are, but whatever your number is, there's different value that comes from big events compared to workshops, right? A workshop might have like 20 people in it, right? Or 20, you might not see more than 40 people throughout the whole weekend. Whereas a big event, you might be in front of 600 people, right? So now you're getting value not just from the monetary side, but also from the exposure to 10 times as many people as a smaller workshop, right? So you can actually decrease your numbers even more as long as you're not doing too many big events a year, right? Like if you did 40 big events a year, right, and you always lowered your price, then either you'd have to make it up with a bunch of private lessons, or you wouldn't be able to hit your numbers. You wouldn't be able to hit your minimums. So it's really important that you balance how many big events you're doing versus how many workshops. So maybe you only do, like for me, I like to do 10 big events a year is probably my maximum, my minimum 2, maximum 10. That leaves me space for, if I'm only working 40 weeks, which I'm willing to work more, I'll go up to like 48 weeks a year, basically taking a month off. But let's say I was only working 40, that would give me 30 weeks of workshops that I could do or other things. So if I'm only charging 1,000, right, then I'm making 30,000 off of those, and then off of the workshops I'm making 30,000. Off the big events, let's say I'm charging half that, so I'm only making 500 per event. For 10 events, that's $5,000. So now I'm making 35,000, and then I need to make private lessons. If I'm charging $100 an hour, then I need to make $5,000 off of private lessons, which means I need to teach 50 private lessons, right? Throughout the year, which is basically 1 per week. A little more than 1 per place I go. Does that make sense? So again, the things I want you to think about when you're thinking about your minimum price, again, these are all minimums, is can I hit the maximum amount? If I put the maximum time that I'm willing to get, can I hit my minimum goals? And then also, I would recommend looking at what do I need to do to hit my or my ideal goals, and what do I need to do to hit my maximum goals, just to know where I'm going in the future. And that will make more sense when we do the next section. Oh, yeah, a couple other things. Now, I want to point out your expenses that I didn't add in here and here. Because when you're teaching group classes, right? I should back up. When you're teaching group classes, you might not have any extra expenses. You might have travel. You might go, okay, I want a little bit for my travel. Or you might be like, it's only a small way, so I'm not going to add in any travel. But you might want to charge a little bit more than this if this number is not the amount including your expenses, your business expenses, right? So you might want to just increase that a little. Again, these are all imaginary numbers. Your numbers are the ones I'm talking about you might want to increase. And same thing here, especially with big events, most likely you are traveling, so you might need to add something in to cover your travel as well. But again, with big events, you want to think about, is it even worth adding anything in? When I think about what am I going to ask a big event, how much am I going to ask from a big event, I've got to think about what's the least I'm willing to go. And like if I got paid less than this, I would be unhappy and I actually wouldn't take the job, right? The biggest mistake I think people make is they ask for what they think is the correct amount to ask for rather than what they really want for that job, right? So, for instance, there's a dance camp in Sweden, the Harang Dance Camp. Like, I have offered to teach for them for free because and to pay my own wages, or not wages, to pay my own flight and travel to get out there so that I could teach for them, right? I've actually done that. I paid to go there and then taught for free for their night classes and stuff so that I could just get exposure to all the people there. And I got a ton of workshops from other people booked by doing that, right? So sometimes you might not even charge anything. Sometimes you might pay your way and end up paying to be able to teach somewhere. And sometimes you might end up asking for more. You might ask for even more than what your minimum is, depending on how badly you want to work at that event, right? But if you really want to work at an event and you're willing to do it for less, then don't say an amount that's more, because then you're risking not getting it just because you added in extra money into what you wanted, right? For no other reason than hoping that you would make more. right? Like we're thinking that's the right price to do it at. So, again, it all comes back to when you think about you're charging too much or you're charging too little, right? If you're charging too little if you can't hit your monetary goals, right? And you're charging too, assuming you're selling out, right? Or you're thinking about like how to sell out. Now, you're charging too much if you can't hit your time goal, right? Like you really want to teach 5 lessons per week and you can't hit, you're not able for some reason to get 5 people to take your classes at your price, then maybe you should lower your price for a little bit until you start getting 5 lessons, and then you can raise your price when you go to 6 lessons or 7 lessons, right? And that's what we're going to talk about next, how to go from maybe a number that's even less than you want to be paid to hit your minimum numbers or your dream goals or things like that.